Hi, guys. Welcome back to Love Letter to Grief. Thank you so much for joining us today. I have a guest with us that I met 7 years ago when I started my grief journey. Um, and I am very happy to introduce her and can't wait for her to share her story. I feel like it's going to be very empowering for a lot of you guys that are listening. So, buckle up. Guys, this is Ashley Cassino. Thank you so much, Ashley, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. All right, so just whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and start your letter. If you want to say more about yourself before you start, you can.
Okay. I guess I'll start with the letter. Dear Grief, I lost my husband on March 2nd, 2013 from a tragic accident. Although I wasn't totally new to grief because I had experienced some significant losses in my family, I had no idea how much my life would be flipped upside down on that day. It is the major hinge pin day in my life. Everything in life seems to pivot forward or backward on that day. That day, my life would change forever. I think that some people don't realize, I know I didn't before it was me, is that day is a forever fixed point in life of before and after. Before that day, William and I were growing our family and making future plans. We had two girls. They were 9 and almost 7, and a 7-month-old baby boy. We had joyfully welcomed July the previous year. I honestly can say that I was in such a sweet season of life. My husband had spent many years in our 13 years of marriage in school and graduate school, and he was finally doing the job he had worked so hard for as a nurse anesthetist. He was living his job. We moved the year before. We were working on making our house our home, and our girls were in 3rd and 1st grade. And I was staying home with my 3. There was a lot of joy in our house. And then on that one day, it all seemed to be snatched away, and we found ourselves in unimaginable grief. My grief was suffocating, but then to watch my kids suffer was unbearable as a mom. There were days I felt like I couldn't come up for air, and just raising 3 young kids alone was so very hard. I was so fortunate to have a support system. Our family lived nearby, and many friends from our church loved us so well. And if it weren't for my faith in God, I can't imagine the darkness I would have lived in, because my faith in God didn't make it hurt any less. But I did have hope during such grief that my husband was in heaven with Jesus and we'd be together again. I'd eventually return to work. I had to adjust my family life to not having a dad come home every day. And honestly, I didn't know how to dream anymore, not for my future. It just seemed like we were going to try to get through it. But I knew my girls needed me. They needed more than that. They struggled seeing me in my grief, and my son didn't have the joyful mom he had once had. From early on in my grief journey, I knew I needed time to heal, but I also knew I wanted my kids to experience a dad again. I was only 36 at my husband's death, so I wanted to experience marriage again. I especially wanted my son, who would have no memories of his daddy, to know the love of a dad. I knew God could answer this prayer, but I didn't know if he would. There were times when an older woman that was a widow would say to me, "You might not find someone you'll love as much as you loved your first husband, but don't let that keep you from remarrying." When I would hear that, I'd cringe a little. I didn't want to remarry with the thought that it'd never be like the first time, but at least I wouldn't be alone. So my prayer really was from then to fall in love again and to be loved with the man that God would bring to me. We met in November of 2017. A friend wanted us to meet, thinking we would hit it off. I was definitely skeptical at the time. I went to lunch with Brian, and although there were no fireworks that day, Brian continued to reach out to me over the next couple days. And as I got to know him more and more, it became clear to me that he was the one I'd been praying for. One thing that surprised me and stood out to me was how he would ask me about William. He'd ask me about my memories of him and would say such kind things about who he was, and he seemed unfaltering in his pursuit of me. I was still grieving, but as I started to love Brian, I noticed how much joy he was bringing to me. And the more I got to know Brian, the more that our relationship wasn't about him caring for my grief, but helping me find joy again and realizing I could dream about my life and a future again. I'm thankful that God answered my prayers and pleas for love again in Brian and our blended family. Watching him love on my kids was sweet. Blending a family is not an easy task by any means, but it has been so worth it. And I have found that Brian didn't make me stop grieving, but he gave me joy and dreams for my future again. And as I felt that joy, my grief did start to heal more and more. I'm thankful for my grief. I know that sounds so strange, but grief has taught me about the beauty of joy. My grief has given me more compassion, a greater capacity to love, unyielding hope, and more gratitude than I ever experienced before. It's expanded my faith in God. It's given me a longing for the future and the promise we have in Jesus. And it's taught me that God will always meet us in the deepest valleys of grief. It's taught me to forgive more quickly. Trust me, I'm still far from perfect. It also taught me that grief is such a unifying experience. We all experience grief in different ways. The experience of grieving is the cost of experiencing much love.
Wow. That was beautiful. You said a lot that I can definitely resonate with. I think one of the things that when I've talked to widows in the past, that a lot of us say that there's like this, like you said, the widow spoke to you and said that you may not love the same way again. And was that like a scary thing for you to even give yourself permission to go there again? Or did you just know that you needed to?
I think it was kind of scary. It's kind of crazy. That just triggered a memory. So I had started dating Brian, and my cousin, who was very familiar with grief, he had lost his mother and his brother in a DUI accident. And so we had talked a lot about grief over the years. And when he found out I was dating Brian, he said, you know, William would want you to love again.
He would or wouldn't?
He would.
Okay.
He would want you to have that experience. And I mean, I just immediately started bawling. And it was like all of a sudden I felt guilt. Instead of the freedom he was trying to give me, I almost felt this guilt, like, is it too soon? You know, all the questions that, you know, I think we ask ourselves. Is it too soon? Is it, you know, what if it's not the same? What if it feels emptier? You know, what about the fears, you know, that come about, you know, to love again is to risk losing again too.
Yeah. That's the bravest part of it, I think. Anytime when I saw you, I mean, of course I met you when I was going through my grief in the very beginning. And when I watched you on Facebook and I saw you got engaged and then you got married, and I was like, man, she is so brave. Because I mean, we know what that feeling feels like. And my grief counselor told me, I asked her, I said, well, how will I ever know when I'm ready to date? And she said, you know, you're ready to date when you're ready to grieve again. And I was like,
never?
like, whoa.
That's tough.
Like, I don't know if I'm ever going to, you know, that was a lot. But I feel like I feel like for widows out there to hear your story, not only to just allow themselves the freedom to be okay with that, because I do feel like there's a lot of pressures that society puts on us and guilt from your in-laws that may come sometimes, or just not knowing if it's too early or the timing, but just in judgment from other people. Did you experience any of that?
Well, I was terrified to tell my mother-in-law. And, you know, she had mentioned to me several times, because I did have the young kids, you know, she had said, your kids need to have a dad's love again. And that was like hard for his mother to tell me, you know, and, but it was true. And knowing that Brian's never going to replace William, it's going to be a different relationship. And yet, why close myself off to that? Because it's not the same.
Right.
So I feel like for the most part, everybody was really happy for us. I mean, I had been a widow for 4.5 years. My kids had asked about, you know, are we ever going to have a dad again?
Wow.
My daughter would say, I want to be like a normal family. And to me, that was sad that she felt like, you know, something was wrong with our family. Yeah. And I know a lot of times kids internalize grief differently than adults, as if something's wrong with me. Something's wrong with my family if we have you know, we're not like the normal family. But for the most part, I feel like people were really joyful for us. And I felt I mean, goodness, Brian, people took him through the ringer. People were like, excuse me, sir, we're going to need to know that you can handle this. And he took it like a champ, because there were times where I felt like, people were a little hard or judgmental of him, just looking at him sideways, But he received it with such humility. And the thing that just stood out to me about him was just, he would say, I want to know who William was through the eyes of your children.
And it is, when you said that, like I feel like every widow needs someone that is so protective of their spirit, that they don't want to try to diminish what you had or try to make you erase those memories. So him talking to you about it and just asking is like, really, that's big.
I think it takes a lot of security, but humility.
Absolutely.
And I don't think that, Brian's a believer. He has a strong relationship with Christ. Outside of that, I can see the insecurity that would come from that.
Right.
I have friends that married widowers, and they felt like there was a constant comparison. Now, I do feel like women get compared to each other more than men do, but I think that there's that temptation there. Are you going to raise these kids like their dad did? And the answer is no.
Right.
There's no way. You can't expect them to. And that's okay.
Yeah. And the reality is, and if you think about it, you actually need them to raise them differently, because not only are you helping to raise them, but you're helping to raise children who lost a father.
That's right.
So they need a different type of rearing, just in that.
There's no way if William had just come back, he could have been the same dad because of the experience of loss. So Brian's a compassionate person. He's empathetic, and that really stood out to me. I also noticed just he was not insecure. He wasn't comparing himself. He wasn't saying, I'm going to be better at this than them. I didn't sense that from him. It was very much like, I want to know who he is. I want to know this dad that y'all had, because I hear he is an awesome guy. Yeah. And for them to just be able to tell him those stories was pretty sweet too.
Okay. And that's a perfect thing. And then to the next segment, when I talk to people about grief, I think hearing about how you lost someone is one thing, but I think that's the human question. People say, oh, well, what happened? And I think that's okay. Sometimes we're a little inquisitive, nosy, whatever you want to say it. But I think the deeper message in this podcast I want people to understand is not how you lost someone, but why was the loss so significant? So like you say, Brian wanted to know about him. So like, can you tell us more about like who your husband was? And for anyone who didn't get a chance to meet him, what did we miss out on?
Yeah, William was special. He, like I said, he was a nurse anesthetist, but that wasn't all who he was. He was a joyful dad. Like, he delighted in our kids. They used to say they liked scaring each other. They had this game where, he would hide and they would try to come find him. And he was always like trying to fake that his body was somewhere else while he's really hiding somewhere else, And my kids just enjoyed him and he enjoyed them. Like, the delight of the father is just a sweet thing to watch as a mom too. And he was funny and smart. He was so crazy smart. Like, everybody knew he was smart. Just and my son is so much like that, which is really sweet. He looks just like his dad. And that's sweet too. And like, his humor, he's got that quick wit and sense of humor. And he's 12 years old and he didn't remember his dad's humor. Right. It's like they just naturally get that, you know? So that's fun to see that in him. And it's sad too, because I know they would laugh together. As far as what happened, so he had gone away with some guys from the church, and they were doing a bunch of stuff. They were like renovating this wall to this barn, and it ended up being really cold that day. There was like snow flurries in the sky. It was March 2nd. It was super cold. and he was going to take down a limb with some other guys. And the way it was described to me is that limb, if it had fallen 100 times, wouldn't have ever fallen the same way twice. Mm. And so, yeah, there's questions of why that happened, why it happened that way. But then here I'm at home with a nursing baby, and I just set him down, and I get a call that there was an accident. And at the time, I had no idea what had happened. I mean, to me, it didn't make sense. I just received a picture of him. Wow. And from another friend, I was like, well, what happened? You know, like I was, and then my mind, I couldn't even wrap my mind around it. Like, he's got to be okay. He's got to be okay. Like, I've got these 3 little kids. He's got to be okay. And then when I found out that he had been killed in the accident, it was just, I just remember my whole world just feeling like it was flipped upside down. And just the shock. And I couldn't, I just couldn't wrap my mind around it. And I think a lot of people experience this. Is like, you almost feel like you're in this out of body experience because you're thinking, how is this happening? Am I going to wake up from this? Mm-hmm. And then you have to wake up to the reality of that every day for a long time. And I think that with a sudden accident, a sudden loss, just all the thoughts of the last conversation we had, the last hug, the last, the very last time he walked out the door, like I wish I'd hugged him longer. Right. My kids were upstairs and they knew Daddy was going away for the weekend. And they have told me to this day, I wish I'd just gone down and hugged him by. And, I've told him, like, we would have wanted more than that too, No one knew. And it's okay to be really sad about that. Yeah. And it's okay to wish you had hugged him, but it's okay to know that, like, Daddy's okay too. Like, he's in heaven. And, if we didn't have that faith, I can't imagine the darkness we would have felt.
Yeah, I agree. My book is titled Love Letter to Grief, Learning to Walk by Faith. And I say the same thing anytime I talk to somebody. I cannot imagine this journey without faith. Mm-hmm. Like, the thought of it literally scares me to death. Like, I cannot even imagine waking up, going to sleep, trying to get through the next moment and not feel like there's a higher power, there's a bigger meaning, there's something else. Mm-hmm. There's life after, like all the things that my faith has taught me. Mm-hmm. I think that's been my saving grace. I say it all the time, like, and just hearing you say it is like, yeah, I cannot imagine it without it.
And it doesn't make it not hurt.
Yeah.
It doesn't make it hurt less. Mm-hmm. It still hurts. And it's still, at times, you struggle with hope. Even though, I know one day. Yeah. I know one day my faith is going to be sight. At one time, I had somebody stop me and say, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear about your husband, but, I'm glad that we have the hope of heaven." It was like she rushed into that. Yeah. And my gut reaction, because I was in not a good space, I was not in a good time in my grief walk. And I said, that's a really long way. That's really far from right now. So I remember those feelings of just being like that. Is it supposed to bring me hope? Probably more than it does. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, each day I found out that God's faithfulness was new every morning. And it's like, okay, another day, right. Another day,
another minute. Yes. Because sometimes I used to tell myself, like, sometimes just the day seems so big. And I would just say, just try to conquer the minutes.
Yes.
For sure. So you just talked about kind of just briefly about how dark it was. What is the one side of grief for someone that's never experienced it? Do you feel like was like the core shaking moment for you?
I guess just, the reality of having not experienced grief to that extent. I just didn't expect the pain, not just in the very beginning, but for years. There was times where I was like, is this going to be the rest of my life? Is it ever going to feel better? Mm-hmm. Am I ever going to get past this? Am I ever going to have hope again? Am I ever going to be joyful again? Am I ever going to not feel the sadness at the back of the laugh?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Because even when you said that, I was trying to think of the first time that I laughed afterwards, and I felt so guilty because it was actually it was right after the funeral, and it was at the the repast, and I was sitting at the table with all of my bridesmaids. Ironic, and I was literally I was in stitches, and I was laughing and laughing, and then I remember I looked over and I saw somebody kind of looking at me, and I felt this instant guilt. Like I was like, oh my God, like why am I laughing? But it was like I needed that. It's almost like you have to give yourself permission, because just because you're laughing doesn't mean it hurts any less. It's like it's okay to do that.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
So my next question I wanted to ask you was, what is one thing that you wish you knew earlier about grief, or how to process it, that you learned later on, that you feel like, man, if I knew this day one, I could have been easier?
Maybe just knowing like it will get better. Like just it's not always going to be this heavy and this hard and this hurtful. So you can that doesn't, take away that pain, but knowing that it's not going to be that heavy forever might have given me a little more permission to laugh without the guilt. Or
Did you meet any other widows in your beginning of your journey that you feel like gave you insight to what to look forward to? Or
at the time I did not know a lot of young widows. It's kind of interesting. After I lost William, people would say, I want you to meet this friend. I want you to meet, people who are behind me, newer in their grief walk than me. But that was a neat thing too, because there were times where I thought, I'm just grieving so hard. I don't know how I'm going to get through this. And I would meet with someone who had just lost their husband 2 weeks before. And it would become this instant reminder, oh, I have grown. I am in a better place. I am stronger. I am able to do more for myself and not feel so reliant on, support from other people. And so the majority of the people I met early, their loss was more recent than mine, but that was still hopeful because it made me realize like I wasn't stuck. I wasn't stagnant. I was getting better and getting stronger.
I think for me, when I first started writing letters, which initially I would just write because I just needed to get it out of my head. And so I would write something, I would post it, or I would just type it and save it. And I always wrote the date on it. And for me, that was a blessing, because even in I would be like 2 years out and I would be having the worst day. Like I cannot get myself through it. And I would read, like even now, I've had this book out for 6 years. I can read something and it will I'm like, oh my God, like I've had so much growth. And just sometimes just those little, like just writing it down, or even just Facebook memories. I love Facebook. Like just the Facebook memories, like you look back like, wow. Like, because even when you think you haven't grown, like you say, you meet somebody that's 2 weeks out and you realize you have gotten a lot further than you realize. Or you be like, okay, let me give myself a little bit more grace, because I'm doing great. I'm doing the best I can. So
yeah, and I think journaling is great. Like even if you are never going to publish the book, never going to put it in right. I mean, those are memories for you to look back on and to tell your kids about one day. There was some really, really vivid dreams I had about William where I felt like he almost visited me in these dreams. And it was just so unreal that I was like, I woke up and just wrote down every detail of it because I didn't want to forget.
Yes.
And
the visitation dreams are they're the best.
Yes.
So when you had your first one, was it scary for you? How was that for you?
It wasn't scary. It was probably within 2 weeks of me losing my husband. It was really soon. And I remember us talking about his loss. That was what was crazy.
Wow.
And he was just there holding my hand, telling me I was going to be okay. And I know not everybody gets those, but the fact that I did, I felt like it was a tremendous gift.
Wow.
For me to say the goodbye I didn't get to say.
2 weeks later. Oh, you can be chill. Wow. That's a blessing. Yeah. 2 weeks. Wow. I have visitation dreams a lot, and sometimes I pray for them. And I remember my very first one. It was really scary because I almost felt like it was like a second loss for me because it was so, like you say, it's so real.
Yes.
And he was there. We were talking, and I knew I was dreaming, like because I don't know how, but I knew what it was as it was happening. And then I just remember, like, just even in the moment of the visitation dream, I kept saying, just let me stay asleep. Just let me stay asleep.
Yeah.
And I remember when I woke up, how devastated I was because it was like, literally, I was like, oh my God, like, I feel like I just lost him again. And it was like that probably like the first one or two dreams. I did the same thing every time I had one. I would get up, I would grab my phone and I would type it, because even in dreams, you remember it when you first wake up, but throughout the day, you remember more things about it. Like, oh my God, I forgot that. Let me add this part. So I did the same thing. I wrote it down because I just wanted to have the memories of it. And just speaking of memories, like, I mean, especially when you have young kids, you want to have things that your kids can look back on, because the thing about grief that I feel like helps us, it does keep us connected to those memories. And I feel like, I pray there's never a moment where I don't feel grief, because I want to be connected to the memory of, somewhat. So what things do you do with your kids to kind of talk about their dad, or just kind of help them with processing his grief this many years later?
So one of the things we like to do, especially like if it's a birthday, to make his favorite food, which they get into that. That's a big thing for them. Make a favorite dessert, or a dessert he used to make us. And then I kind of started where for his birthday, I would so he made this like amazing shrimp and grits recipe. It was so good. And I was like, I want to share this with more than just my family. In the very beginning, we would have people gather together to remember his birthday. But as time passed, I started realizing that I wanted to like give that memory to someone else. So, if somebody has a loss or a hospitalization or something, like taking that and saying like, I hope you remember William through this, this shrimp and grits as well. So that's kind of been a sweet little thing that my kids have done with me. And then, sometimes I just want to like talk about something that you did, or watch a little video, or, ask questions, especially my son, because he was so young when his dad died. He was only 7 months old, so he didn't have his own memories. So he wants to like hear, just about his dad's delight in him. And I want to make sure that I communicate that well. Like, your dad was crazy about you. And oh my goodness, I heard that joke you just told. That was hilarious. That sounds just like something your dad would say. And he usually just like lights up, you know.
That's special. I love that. Because I do think when it comes to just grief altogether, I think just being able to recreate memories or keep memories that that from the past is really good. So I think we do that too a lot, because Darrell was an amazing cook. Like, oh my God, like this man could make something from anything. It was insane. And it was just like Taylor was 10 when he passed away, and some days she would be in the kitchen and I would be asking myself, how does she even know what she's doing? And I always think to myself, it's like she's just like, it's in her. And she would just cook things, and it's just like the most random things. I'm like, you're 10. Why are you making that?
That's so neat.
And so, I think I love that. I had another question for you. Oh, just speaking, I know you were telling me earlier about your kids. They're in college now. So Taylor's a senior, and I'm having a really hard moment with that, because it's in my head. I'm thinking like I've had her since the loss. And so now I'm like trying to come to terms with like, what am I supposed to do with myself after, like when she goes to college? So was that a hard adjustment for you?
Oh gosh, yes. And with my oldest, I feel like I grieved not just the fact that she wasn't in my house, but I felt like I grieved the fact that I missed part of her childhood. Because in my deepest grief, I didn't retain a lot of memories through that, season of my life. It was like I almost have to look back at pictures to remember certain things that happened or certain things we did. And so I almost went through this process of grieving, feeling like I had lost part of our family, even my children, through our grief. And that was really, really hard to process that. But we've become closer since she's been away at school. My oldest, my youngest, well, I have 2 girls, and they're the ones that are in college. Pierce is 12. But the 2 girls, just I feel like it's changed our relationship, and it's in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
And, my son has had a hard time with it too because, his sisters were around all the time. He has 2 stepbrothers. They were around all the time. And now my youngest stepson, he's working. He's a senior. He's kind of one foot at the door, like always busy. And so our family dynamics have changed. So we went from, just the 4 of us, me and the 3 kids, and feeling such emptiness and loneliness and feeling like we would never feel that full again. And I remember, like at Christmas, the whole debate on, do we hang a stocking? Do we hang it? Is that going to be more painful to see it? Is it not? And then 5 years later, I married Brian. He's got 4 children. So I have 4 stepchildren. And I've got 5 more stockings hung up that Christmas. So that's a story only God can tell.
Yeah.
And it's, it hadn't been easy by any means, but to see like how God can give you joy again and give you a new family and, bumpy as it is, just new hopes and dreams, and then have this family full of children around the table that I, didn't give birth to is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
So now we're kind of going through the backwards process of that, of each one of them going to school. And Pierce has like gone through this whole process of saying like, we used to have a table full, but he doesn't remember that table not being full before. And, it's just, life is so full of seasons.
Yeah,
and
it is.
That's hard and good and sweet. And I think the biggest like lesson from that is to like just whatever season you're in, just try to hold on to it. Just try to soak it up.
Right.
And enjoy it. I mean, even if it's hard, because as we know, like life can always get harder.
Absolutely. Yeah. I agree. I feel like the seasons there's always lessons. And so even in the darkest seasons, there's a lesson there. And I think just being present in that moment. I was listening to something on live the other day, and this lady said, what's the easiest way to get through grief? And she said, just go straight through it. Just experience it, soak it up, listen to it, feel it. And I think that's the same with seasons in life. We're here for a reason. And I think we just have to stay present in a moment and try to look past our own self to see what else we're supposed to be doing in that moment.
And there's beauty in it. Even in the pain, like just seeing the way other people loved me and my kids through that. And seeing like just God's love, us knowing him and meeting him in ways that I don't think we would have outside of that tremendous grief. I at the time, I probably wanted to wish it away, and it felt so slow. But looking back, I see like it, even in that, there was such sweet season and sweet joys in it, just like trying to appreciate each of those beautiful moments. And like I started seeing rainbows all the time. I don't know if you saw certain things. I started seeing sparrows. That was another thing, and rainbows. And I just remember on some of my darkest days, like feeling like this is never going to end. And like all of a sudden there would be this rainbow in the sky that would just come out of nowhere.
Right.
And it was like just a reminder, like it's not always going to be like this.
Yeah. And you said something that made me the next thing I was going to ask you about, because a lot of times people say, like, people will know you're going through something, going through one of your seasons, and they want to reach out. And a lot of times people, out of fear of saying the wrong thing, they don't know what to say or they don't know what to do. And I always tell people the easiest thing to do is something that comes natural. So what were some of the things you talked about, how people loved on you and your family during that time? What are some of the things that really stood out to you that people did?
Oh, goodness. Well, I mean, we had people bring meals, for the longest time, which was so sweet. I mean, I tell people to this day, if you don't know what to say, just show up with a meal because
you got to eat
that, loving someone in that way and just saying like, I'm with you, I'm thinking about you. I would have people like, maybe they'd give a gift card or drop a box of diapers off at my house. And I remember one time, it just really floored me. This couple pulled up at my house and knocked on my door, and I didn't really know him at all. But found out later he had lost his mother as a child, and they decided, instead of spending money on each other for Christmas, to give my kids this envelope with money in it for them to pick out what they wanted for Christmas. And I mean, I was floored. I didn't even know them. And I just remember being so touched by that and just thinking like, wow, that was amazing. And it doesn't have to be that extravagant by any means. But sometimes I would go to my mailbox and there would be like a mug with, a note in it, or just things like that. Like sometimes it was small and sometimes it was big, but just feeling like that people were surrounding us. People were loving us. People were thinking about us. People were just remembering us. And the fact that they wouldn't just do that for first few weeks or first few months, but sometimes it was like 1 to 2 years later, maybe 3 years later, somebody's doing that. And that's when it really like touched me even more, because I knew like there'd be times where I'd be like, people have forgotten, or people don't realize how hard it still is, or people don't understand, and then I would have those little, just gifts of love, and it would just really touch me.
Yeah. I always say like, when people say I'm praying for you, especially in the very beginning, people would say, "Oh, I'm praying for you," and in my head, I would envision the Care Bears, how the little light shines out, and I always felt like, I felt like from the very beginning, I was surrounded by prayers.
That's
and I know there's a lot of people who don't share that, and my heart breaks for people who don't have support. But I think that's just a testament to like the husbands that we had, that people loved us even more through them, and the loss of them made them want to love on us and our kids more. But that was definitely something for me as well. Just the people saying I'm praying for you, and then doing sweet things like that stand out. So I always try to encourage people, even if you don't know what to say, sometimes just saying to a person, I don't know what to say, that means a lot to a person, because it tells me that at least you thought about it. And I want to also try to encourage people. Like sometimes people say, well, I don't want to make you sad by talking about them. I'm like, well,
it's always there.
Yeah. I promise you, there's not a moment that if you mention his name is going to remind me that he's not here.
Right.
So I just want to encourage people. It's okay to say his name. Like if you have a funny story, especially for our kids, it's share it. Like if you want to, say something that you and my husband shared that Taylor could hear that I wouldn't be able to share with her. I think that's those type of things are super sweet too.
Well, and, even when people would say, like, I don't want to make you cry, sometimes I would just immediately start crying, because you're just so sensitive to everything. Or sometimes people would say the wrong thing. But I think even later, even if I didn't appreciate it at the time, later I appreciated that there was an effort there to comfort or to say something, to reach out. Because I think people mean well, and they stumble over their words. And, having been through what I've been through, if there's another widow, I'm not going to say the right thing all the time either.
Right. Because every widow story is different.
Yeah.
Every loss is different. Like we may share the grief of losing a husband, but all of us had a different story. All of our love stories were different. All of our losses were different. What was left after was different. So I agree with that 100%. But I do like to just try to offer some type of encouragement for people. So what is something that you would say to someone that's very new in their grief of being a widow to encourage them?
I would say it's okay to grieve for as long as you need to grieve. That there will be times where we'll try to fix you or rush you or tell you you're grieving too long, you're not grieving the right way, or whatever that looks like. And I would say it's okay for you to grieve how you need to grieve, as long as it's not destructive. You've got to allow yourself, give yourself permission to grieve, and give yourself permission to laugh and to be okay some days, and to not feel guilt about that. And I think another thing would be, like, if there's people in your life that don't stay with you through that process, not everybody can and is made for that. And that's okay too. Sometimes your surroundings, your friends will change.
Mm-hmm.
People you weren't necessarily close to before become your closest friends, and people you thought were your closest friends, they don't know how to handle or process your grief. And sometimes they are experiencing their own grief, but they don't want to share that with you because they almost feel guilty telling you that they're grieving too. So then they pull back. And I would say, like, we all experience that, to some degree. And it's okay. It's really not about you. It's about just where they are. And it's okay to give yourself permission to, be where you are on any given day.
Yeah. I think that's such a real thing that you said. And I haven't talked to anyone about that recently, but that is so true. And I think the reason that we gain new friendships and lose other friendships or family members is because those people knew how to love the old you. And so sometimes that's, I try to give people grace because I did lose a lot of friends, and not a lot. I lost a couple of really close friends that to me, I thought like they should understand this and this should be easier. But the reality is I was not the same friend they were used to. And I feel like sometimes with the loss, you become a different person. You can't be the same person you were, like you say, the before and after. It was so powerful when you said that, the before and after. And so the person you were after, some friendships, they were seasonal. Like their season of you, it's already run its course. And so I think embracing people that are going to come into their lives when they need them to love this new person and help them through that new season. I think being open to that will be very good for people.
Well, and I guess we all have different gifts. Some people seem to be so gifted at sitting with someone in their grief. And if someone listening to this is a friend that says, I want to be there for another friend, I don't know what to do. How do I show up? Sometimes just sitting with them and sharing a box of tissue and crying and letting them be where they are is the best gift to them, because it says to them, like, I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not afraid of your feelings. I'm not afraid of you being angry or sad or hurt or feeling despair.
Right.
I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be right here with you. Yeah. And what is the saying? Shared grief is divided grief. And shared joy is multiplied joy. And I think that's so true in life. That.
Yeah. I think for me, I remember early on just missing physical touch. And I remember this guy at church was an older deacon. I was at church and he was like, hey, how you doing? And he hugged me and I just was in a puddle. But he was like, oh, okay. Like, I didn't mean to do that. But sometimes just like I needed that. Like, I mean, like just an elder from my church, not even understanding like the depth of what he just given me, but like just that hug, it would just gave me like the permission to just release. So like you say, sometimes just it's okay to just allow a person to cry or just call and just say, hey, I want to take you to lunch or stop by. And I feel like sometimes it's hard when you're going through because you don't want to become the widow, like I remember in my head, I kept, because I was 37 is super young too. And I just remember thinking like, first of all, I didn't even think widow was a thing for us at that age. Like, okay, that wasn't in the cards. But I just remember thinking like, I don't want to become the widow friend that everybody sees is always like this sad person is always crying. But in that process, just the people that surrounded me, they never made me feel like that. And I think that's just a testament to my faith and the love that we shared and the people that we surround ourselves with that continue to love on us after. So that was important for me. So I do think if someone's listening, like you say, if they want to be a friend, they don't know what to do, just show up.
I remember too, like a few times people would send me a text message and say, I'm so sorry. I feel like I said something wrong. Will you forgive me? I don't know what, they would either say that they were worried that something they said hurt my feelings or whatever. to me, that was so sweet that
Mm-hmm.
they were so sensitive about my feelings. Most of the time, what they had said was not hurtful,
Mm-hmm.
you know. I mean, maybe I did cry in the moment and said they thought that they, had hurt me. But to me, it was just so sweet to see that people cared that much about my
Mm-hmm.
heart, that they cared that much about the way I would receive words that they were trying to express. And,
Yeah.
So I would say if you say something to someone and it's the wrong thing to say, then it's okay to later say, man, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That did not come out right.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I think just kind of removing the fear for the friend
Mm-hmm.
to love on the person who's grieving.
Right. And you know what? I was very intentional with my grief. I remember thinking early on, like someone would say, "How are you doing?" And I think it's natural for us to say, I'm okay."
Mm-hmm.
And I told myself, I was like, nope, I'm not doing that. I was like, if I have to go through this and they're my friends, they are going to have to sign up for it too.
Mm-hmm.
And so I gave myself permission to be as brutally honest as I needed to. And if they text me on one of those days where I couldn't get out of bed and they were like, "How are you?" I would tell them.
Mm.
I literally think I'm dying. Like I feel like I'm not going to make it. And I remember one of my friends years later, she told me, she said, I would wake up and I would text you. And she said, but I would pray first.
Mm.
And she was like, because sometimes those messages back would be so hard for me to read. But she said, but then I would pray more because I was like, man, if it's hard for me to read, I can't even imagine what she's even going through. That's what the message that she texts me. So I think as someone that's going through your grief journey, we can't expect people to know what to do and know what to say if we're not honest with them. So I think give yourself permission to be honest.
Yeah.
You don't have to say, I'm okay.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, I think your friends who really care about you want that too.
Yeah.
Like, they want to know, like, what's hard about today or what made you laugh today. I mean, I had a friend that would reach out and say, like, what do you miss about William the most right now?
Oh.
And that was sweet because it wasn't just asking me about my heart. It was asking me, like, about William, and it gave me an opportunity to talk about him to someone who wanted to hear about it. Right. And that was
that's
sweet.
The thing. Like, sometimes you feel like, oh, am I talking about him too much? And so that's just an invitation. Like, oh, perfect. This is exactly what I need. Yeah. That's really sweet. So just in closing, like I say, I really wanted to have you on because I do feel like your story was just watching you from afar and just seeing your love story play out with your husband now. And I'm so proud of you.
Oh, thank you.
And so happy for you now. And I agree with you. Like, I'm glad that God answered your prayers. And I hope that someone that's listening can give themselves permission to be open to love again.
Yeah.
And so, and I know you spoke about it a little bit, but just kind of, do you have anything to say to someone that's maybe struggling with wanting to give love a second try, or just how to even step into it?
Yeah, I think like saying yes to the dates. You don't have to go more than once. I had this, my husband laughs about it to this day. I had a strict first date policy, and it was like I would meet somebody for like an hour, and I would just say, like, we can meet from 12 to 1, and that way I knew if it was not going well at 1 o'clock, I was out of there. I never had to see him again because it just like, it feels like major vulnerability to walk into a date when you hadn't dated. I mean, I hadn't dated in 20 years anybody else, you know? I was like, I don't know how to do this again. That's a scary thought. So I think just, being open to a 1 hour, maybe that'll give somebody an opportunity to say, okay, I got 1 hour for it. And then the second thing would be, like, don't get too impatient too. Like, I know that it's lonely and it's hard and you want to find someone in some ways to fill that hole that you have. But the right person or the wrong person is never going to fill that, So
oh my goodness, that's powerful.
Wait for the right person, because the right person will eventually come, but don't rush so much that, you try to fix it with the wrong person. And I mean, I've seen some friends who've gone back to dating after divorce, and I'm like, oh, don't let's next. Next. So whatever your situation is, I think it's important just to wait on the right person. but like prayer was a huge part of that.
Mhm.
Like I knew that, like, so I had gone on some dates with people. I'd been set up a few times,
Mhm.
like, and every single time I had left the date and like cried on the way home. And I was like, this feels lonely. Like there's so much, William and I had a season of life together. It was a long season. Like we had been married for 13 years. We had a family together. Like this, nothing's ever going to feel like that. And a friend of mine told me one time, she said, I'm praying that whoever is the right person will feel like home.
Mm.
And I was like, wow. Because for me, grief felt so much like homesickness.
Mm. Wow.
And so when I met my husband, it didn't feel forced. It didn't feel awkward. It felt like I was going back home. Like it was a homecoming for me. It was like this sweet familiarity, and like he had been through a hard divorce. His divorce had happened about 2 weeks before my husband died. So here we are almost on this exact same trajectory of what the time frame and everything. And just meeting him felt like we just got each other. And so, and it wasn't not just around our shared sadness, but it was like we had shared values. We had shared ways of like what we wanted for our children and things like that. And so, of course, those things are all important. But that was like, if anybody asked me, how do you describe grief? I would say it feels like profound homesickness.
Yeah.
And when you find that person that you're supposed to be with and they feel like you're coming back home, that's a sweet, sweet thing.
That's the perfect ending. I don't even know what to say. I thought it was beautiful.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you for being here and sharing your story with me and everyone that's listening. So, guys, if you're still tuned in, thank you for listening to Love Letter to Grief. And we're just finishing up with Ashley Cassino. And it was beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.